This video is an add-on to my previous one on psychosis, which I'll provide the link for. And I said a couple of things I wanted to elaborate on. The first being the phenomena of going to the doctor with all these symptoms, suddenly feeling better, getting tests done, and going home. And for a brief period, you felt good, possibly even forgot what your symptoms were. The tests come back negative, and since you're back in your stress, the symptoms return and you're left discouraged. That right there is related to what's called the placebo. Now, I don't actually like the term, kind of like with psychosis, but I think we all understand the concept of it, so it's a good starting point. But the placebo effect is simply just the parasympathetic state. That's it. There's no mystery or special effect. It's just the total removal of the stress, that sympathetic, activated state, the adrenaline and cortisol spikes, the being stuck in trauma damage, in inflammation, in a lack of security. So for the classic placebo test, the way it works is some people are given a sugar pill, while others are given the real medication, and they compare the results. Many times the placebo works as well, if not better than the medication. This is because they were acting. They were getting help, and that turned on their healing state, the parasympathetic. Now, the reason I don't like the placebo explanation is because it's thought to be belief-based, because you believe it works. This is not the case. Belief only comes into the factor if it's accompanied by the real effect, acting. For this same reason, all these ideas on hope, manifestation, intentions, they don't work. They do the opposite. They create expectations, they create conditions, they cause rigidity. They are functions of the sympathetic state. They are stressors. That's why you can't take advantage of the placebo by believing in it or manifesting it. It just keeps you from actually relaxing, and this especially does more damage because when it doesn't work, you look at yourself like there's some kind of failure on your part. You weren't good enough, you weren't pure enough, or believe enough. It's training helplessness and ruining self-esteem and confidence, throwing you into further blockades of your nervous system, the opposite of healing. This ties into the other point I brought up, how you can be in the sympathetic state while under stress, to actually lose stress while in those situations, in difficult or harrowing events, how to ease the tension and nerves, how to be cool, calm, breathing during these tense moments, these fight or flight responses. And this goes into how you rework and retrain those conditioned trauma responses by being able to do them again, because you'll be stuck in that place over and over until you do it right, until you complete it with cool, ease, confidence, action. That alters the physiological reaction, the flinching and alertness that immediately throws off your entire regulation. I've made multiple videos on this, which I'll also provide. One is how to become a cryptid, which is about ghost ships and skeleton keys. And the other is Sword in the Stone, the secret of alchemy. Now, for some history, which will weave some understanding together, this legend of the Sword in the Stone actually stems from the Scythians, a Proto-Indo-Iranian group of equestrian cultures of nomads. And they spanned a huge area. And a lot of their stories would make their way and blend with the Nart sagas, which are the legends and tales of the North Caucasus regions. And they had themes of giants led by a matriarch, questing horse warriors, swords and stones, grails, and so on. Sounds familiar? That's because these would then go west and blend in with a lot of Celtic and Welsh cultures, finally giving us the Arthurian cycle, the Sword in the Stone, the ideas of the Fisher King, Gawain and the Green Knight, who again, as a side note, finds common ancestry with Al-Qadir, the green teacher of prophets in Islamic and especially Sufi mysticism, Osiris the Green One, the Eye of Horus, the Nizar Eye, the Peacock Feather, Soma, and we can actually go in any direction and see more of this. The Dreamtime Vision Serpents of the Waterhole of Aboriginal Australians, the Aztec Quetzalcoatl, the iridescent green feathered serpent, the Bifrost of Nordic cycles, and so on. And it's related to the thalamus and sleep activation, imagination, dreams. I talk about this in other videos, Repairer of Dreams, and the Angel Thrones from Exoterica 1, the green phosphines. It's related to the parasympathetic system and sleep and healing. But we'll get into more detail in that when we go over the thalamus in more detail and that oneness of the land that's prevalent in these cultures. The purpose of listing all of that is the theme I'm about to explain is ubiquitous, but in many forms. Tales told, folklore, fairy tales, fables, legends that you can find in every culture in many ways, because it's experienced independently, even though some cases there's shared exchange and blending of cultures. And it's this idea of oneness with the land and ease in doing labor. So the sword and the stone is this placebo effect explained. Again, every culture has better tales of this effect than what we call the placebo. But in the Arthurian cycle, which is very clear and archetypal iteration, all of these people wanted to draw the sword that was stuck in the stone. They wanted the power, they wanted to be the special one, the chosen one. They expected, they manifested, they hoped. They got in their head, they tensed up, so the rock and the sword did too, as their hardness extended into the stone and its lodged sword. But then comes the boy Arthur, and he doesn't expect anything. He didn't care. He didn't even really want to try. There was no conditions, no hope, no sense of entitlement. Merely an instinctual action. He just pulled it. No thought, no rigidity, no sympathetic tension. Just eased it out. He blended with the sword and stone. They weren't in any way divided in that moment, blurred from one to another. And from here, Arthur and the land are one for the rest of the story. His sympathetic and parasympathetic states both reflect and impact the land, and the land to him. When the land cries, he bleeds. When he hurts, the land bleeds. Now you can find versions of this effect, or tales of how this works in the Rig Veda, in Taoism, in Polynesian sailors, in Caribbean lore, in Native American stories, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Local folklore, the moral of many stories, and pass down ideas of how things work, or how to get things to work, how to flow, or be within the zone of something, to ease through reality, to do things with the favor of the gods, or with the favor of the land, or ancestors. Today, our understanding is pretty barren. We mainly just have one idea, which is beginner's luck. When you do something for the first time, you have no preconceptions, you have no expectations, you're not manifesting, there's no hope, no thought, just instinct, just action. You do the thing and it warps and works out. There's a feeling of having entirely blended with the land, the event, the art, whatever the situation is. Then you try the second time. You suddenly want to recreate the sensation. You overthink it. You make expectations. You feel the eyes on you. You try to perform now. You are rigid. You're tense. You stop breathing. There's no more cool. The nerves are lit up, and you mess up. But you actually understand this in more contexts, like cooking without measuring, or navigating without directions, action without instruction, all cool, nerved instinct. What I used to do in grade school, which I never studied for anything, because in the tests, I simply answered the questions. I didn't need to memorize the material. I knew it because I felt it. I let myself stop thinking, and I just sensed the answers. I just knew what they were. I felt that pull, or that correctness in them. You listen to your heart. You move to the beat of it. You might hear that if you do things when you are pure of heart, they work out. And the heart knows the way when you are in the parasympathetic state, because all that need ever be said and all that should ever be said is silence. There's a quote I like to reference from Rumi. There is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. You know this, in making a wish under a shooting star, there's a split second to make the wish before it fades. There's no thought. Your instinct tells you what to wish for, and you make the wish. Then you'll start to get that placebo effect, beginner's luck, the sword and the stone, and all the things you do. So consider those little things that you do that you are so confident in that you don't even think about. It's just pure instinct and heart and action. And think about how those things are therapeutic, calming, and try to extend that to other areas of your life that are rigid, where you have to be alert and it's scary, to find the calm, the smooth, the cool. There was a fiction book about this Waylander. He's a drifter and an assassin, and he hunts down bad people, and one time he saves this other character. And that person wants to learn from him, wants to be trained so that they can defend themselves and fight back. So the assassin agrees, but only if they can answer his test. So all he asks is to catch a small rock that he'll throw their way. It's midnight, it's hard to see. The first toss, the character misses, so they go a couple more times, and they catch it. The character is excited to have caught it, and the assassin says, okay, anyone can do that. But what happens when there is a threat? When there's something at stake? Maybe it's life or death. Can you do it under pressure? So he says, this is the last throw. If you catch it, I'll train you. If you don't, then you just don't have what it takes, and I ride out of here alone. Under pressure, it's a completely different story. But he throws the rock. It's not the best throw. It's dark. It's a tiny object, barely a glint. But the character manages to catch it after it bounced off their palm, but they snatched it before it hit the ground. They exclaimed, I did it. I won. The assassin said, no. What did you actually do? The character didn't understand, and if they couldn't understand, then the test was failed. So he gave an opportunity. He explained something along the lines that the circumstances didn't matter. There's no victory. There's no winning. No losing. Everything is just context, details. It's not part of the action. The stress is in your head. The consequences, the outcome, the threat, the danger, they don't change what is happening. All it is, one action, one reaction, one instinct, no thoughts, no mind, just movement. So he asked again one last time, what did you do? And finally the answer to the test clicked, and they replied, I caught a pebble in the moonlight.